You won't believe how fast things spiraled the moment we refused to pay a bogus HOA fine, and how one angry Karen learned the hard way that not everyone is easy to push around. It started with something so small, so ridiculous, that we honestly thought it was a joke at first. A trash can. Yeah, you heard that right. A plain old plastic trash can sitting by the curb. We had just moved into our newly purchased Lakeview property in what was supposed to be a peaceful HOA community nestled in the hills of Tennessee. After years of working high-stress jobs, my wife Rachel serving as a senior circuit court judge, and myself having just retired from government fieldwork, we were ready for calm mornings, fishing at dawn, and weekends grilling by the porch. But peace doesn't exist when you've got an HOA president named Karen who treats her title like it's military rank. She drove around the neighborhood in a customized golf cart like a patrol vehicle, sunglasses on even at dusk, armed with a clipboard and a sour attitude. She handed out fines the way Oprah gave away cars: you get one. You get one. She fined people for things like too many flowers in a garden bed, for having wind chimes that made more than 3 decibels of sound, and even for kids chalk drawing on their own driveways. We'd heard rumors before we moved in, but nothing could have prepared us for just how out of control Karen really was. Our first week went by quietly. We unpacked boxes, cleaned up the yard, and enjoyed our morning coffee looking out at the lake. One night before trash pickup day, I placed our garbage can at the edge of the driveway, maybe 3 hours early. Didn't think much of it. The next morning, a bright pink envelope was taped to our door with thick, bold letters: violation, trash out too early, fine, $200. I thought it had to be a prank. But nope. The HOA's fine notice included our lot number, a digital timestamp photo of our bin, and Karen's signature at the bottom. I almost laughed, until I saw Rachel's face. "She's pushing buttons," Rachel said calmly. "This isn't about the trash. She's seeing what we'll tolerate." I knew that tone in her voice. My wife didn't raise her voice when she was angry. She got quieter, more precise, like a scalpel. We reviewed the HOA bylaws. According to the document, trash bins were to be placed no earlier than 6 p.m. the evening before collection day. I had placed mine out at 6:12 p.m. In fact, Karen's own timestamp on the photo showed 6:12. That's when I realized, this woman wasn't just enforcing rules, she was inventing them. We replied with a firm but respectful email citing their own rules, showing her she was in the wrong. No apology came. Just a blunt reply 2 hours later: "You're in my neighborhood now. Learn how to follow the rules." That was her whole message. That's when we knew this was going to be a problem. Over the next few days, Karen doubled down. She'd slow roll past our house in her golf cart, scribbling notes. A few days later, another violation showed up: unapproved porch furniture, $300. For what? 2 wooden Adirondack chairs we bought from a local craftsman. The rules said outdoor furniture must be well-maintained and not offensive. There was nothing offensive about these chairs. Then came vehicle violation, $150, because I parked my SUV in the driveway instead of the garage one evening. The SUV was fully registered, clean, and didn't block any paths. But Karen claimed it didn't meet aesthetic HOA standards. We started getting nervous, not because we feared the fines themselves, we could afford to pay them, but because we saw where this was heading. Karen was trying to run us out. She saw us as outsiders. Maybe she didn't like that Rachel was a powerful judge. Or maybe she didn't like our last name, our quiet confidence, or just the fact that we didn't kneel the moment she sent her first violation. I decided to request a meeting with the HOA board. I thought maybe the other members would see reason. When we arrived at the community center, about a dozen neighbors were already seated. Karen walked in late, wearing oversized sunglasses like a celebrity trying to avoid paparazzi. She ignored the agenda entirely and launched straight into a tirade about how certain residents were endangering the harmony of the neighborhood. She looked straight at us. "Rules exist for a reason," she snapped. "If you don't want to be part of a respectable HOA, maybe you should have bought a cabin in the woods." I wanted to say something, but Rachel gently touched my arm. Her restraint was impressive. I could see the fire in her eyes, though. "We're not challenging the rules," Rachel said. "We're asking that they be applied correctly and fairly." We followed the trash policy. We reviewed the furniture guidelines. If there's an issue, let's talk facts, not feelings. But Karen wasn't interested in facts. She waved her hand like a queen dismissing a servant and said, "This isn't up for debate. This is enforcement." The board, clearly tired of her, stayed silent. They wouldn't support us. They were scared of her too. That's when it became clear that this wasn't a community. It was a kingdom. Karen's kingdom. And in her eyes, we were the rebels. We went home that night frustrated but calm. We documented everything, from emails to meeting minutes. Rachel even printed out copies of the HOA charter and highlighted every place where Karen had twisted the rules. "She thinks she's untouchable," Rachel said, sipping her tea. "But she's never gone up against someone who knows the law better than she does." I nodded. I knew what she meant. She wasn't talking about some petty legal argument. She was preparing for something bigger. We just didn't know how soon the storm would hit. Because the very next morning, things took a turn we never expected. Blue lights. Deputies. And Karen, standing in our driveway with a smug grin, ready to watch us be hauled off like criminals. The next morning started like any other. The sun was barely peeking over the trees, casting golden light on the lake behind our cabin. I stepped outside with my coffee in hand, ready to mow the lawn and enjoy a quiet morning. But that calm lasted about 30 seconds. Because right as I was pulling the mower out of the shed, 2 sheriff's patrol vehicles slowly rolled up our gravel driveway. My heart skipped, but not out of guilt. I hadn't broken a single rule. It was confusion. And then I saw her, Karen, standing by the road, arms folded, wearing her usual pink tracksuit and oversized sunglasses, grinning like a cat that had just caught a canary. I set the mower down and walked toward the officers. "Morning, gentlemen. Can I help you?" The first deputy, Officer Miller, looked apologetic before he even spoke. The second one, younger, was flipping through a printed file. "Sir," Miller began, "we've been asked to serve a civil citation and escort you to the County Code Enforcement Office for questioning regarding HOA violations." I stared at him for a long second. "You're telling me I'm being escorted off my own property over a homeowners association fine?" "It's more than one fine, sir," said the younger officer. "There's a formal complaint filed with the county about you being non-compliant with local nuisance laws and HOA mandates tied to community zoning enforcement." I turned to look at Karen, who was now filming with her phone from behind a tree, just out of earshot. "She's behind this, isn't she?" I said quietly. "This is about her." "We're just following orders," Officer Miller said, though even he didn't seem to believe in the reason behind them. At that moment, Rachel stepped out onto the porch. She was in casual clothes, blue jeans, a long-sleeved top, and slippers. But the expression on her face instantly reminded me of the courtroom version of her, calm, composed, and unshakably in control. She raised her hand slightly. "Officers, I'd like to clarify something before this goes any further. My husband hasn't violated any enforceable laws or regulations. And I happen to know that for a fact." The younger deputy shifted. "Ma'am, who exactly are you?" Rachel walked down the steps slowly and handed them a leather-bound folder. "I'm Judge Rachel Myers. I serve as the chief judge for this district's civil circuit court." Inside that folder is a highlighted copy of the HOA charter, our property's exemption status granted by the county last month, and a cease and desist letter I drafted this morning." Both officers blinked. Karen's phone dropped slightly. "This HOA," Rachel continued, her voice firm but respectful, "has overstepped its authority by filing a criminal complaint based on civil rule violations. That is not only improper. It's an abuse of process. And unless the two of you want to be caught in the middle of a lawsuit, I suggest you read that documentation carefully before taking another step onto our land." Officer Miller opened the folder, reading the documents closely. The younger one leaned over his shoulder. After a few moments, Miller looked up and exhaled hard. "I didn't know any of this, Your Honor. These citations are outside of what we're actually allowed to enforce. This should have gone through mediation, not patrol response." "Exactly," Rachel nodded. But Karen didn't want mediation. She wanted humiliation. "She thought sending you here would scare us into compliance." Karen stormed across the lawn now, flustered and red-faced. "This is harassment," she shouted. "You can't just ignore the rules. This is a homeowners association, not a free-for-all." Rachel turned to her calmly. "Karen, you've issued fines without proper board approval, selectively enforced rules that don't exist in the charter, and now you've tried to weaponize law enforcement over non-criminal matters. That's not how any of this works. You think just because you're a judge, the law doesn't apply to you?" Karen barked. "You think you're special?" Rachel smiled. Not smugly, just knowingly. "Oh, the law applies to me. Which is why I follow it. Maybe you should try it sometime." Karen looked like she was about to explode. But she had nothing left to say. The two officers gently suggested everyone step back. "No charges," Miller said. "No detainment. We're calling this a misfiled civil complaint. We'll file a report, but nothing goes further today." Rachel turned back to me. "You okay?" I nodded. Just surprised. I knew she was petty, but this? She wanted to see us cuffed. "She wanted a power show," Rachel replied. "What she got was a reality check." Karen stormed off, muttering something under her breath. The younger officer leaned over to me and whispered, "Sir, between you and me? We've had 4 calls from her in the last 2 weeks. All bogus." "Good to know," I said. "You might want to let the county know about her pattern." "Already planning to," he said with a wink. After they left, I turned to Rachel and asked, "You think she'll back off now?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Karen? Not a chance. But she just made a huge mistake. Filing a false law enforcement complaint, abusing HOA authority, and attempting to escalate a civil matter into a criminal one, this isn't something the courts will ignore." I could see she was already forming a strategy in her mind. Rachel wasn't just thinking about defending us anymore, she was preparing to dismantle Karen's entire little empire, brick by brick. And Karen? Well, she had no idea the storm she just unleashed. That evening, after the cops left and Karen stormed off like a toddler who didn't get her way, Rachel sat quietly on the porch with her laptop and a thick red pen in hand. She wasn't just cooling off, she was preparing a case file. I knew that look. That laser focus, the way she clicked the pen cap 3 times before highlighting a section of the HOA charter. Rachel had taken down corporate developers, shady landlords, even corrupt city inspectors in her courtroom. Karen didn't stand a chance. But we weren't out for revenge. We wanted fairness. We wanted peace. And more importantly, we wanted Karen to understand that abusing her little position of power could come with real consequences. The next morning, Rachel sent a formal letter to the County Civil Code Board, attaching all the documented violations, emails, and copies of the fake fines. But she didn't stop there. She also sent it to the state HOA Oversight Committee, which very few people even know exists, and she included a signed statement detailing Karen's false complaint that led to police being wrongfully dispatched to our property. That was a serious offense. Karen thought we'd be intimidated. But instead, she gave us ammunition. For the next few days, things were oddly quiet. No fines taped to our door. No HOA emails. Karen's golf cart didn't roll past our house once. At first, we thought maybe she'd taken the hint. Maybe, finally, she realized she'd picked the wrong fight. But that peace didn't last. One morning, I walked out to get the mail and found a handwritten flyer shoved into everyone's mailboxes. It read, "Urgent HOA alert, disrespectful resident refusing to comply, destabilizing our neighborhood." No names were mentioned, but come on, it was obviously about us. The flyer claimed we were causing legal disruptions, endangering neighborhood harmony, and even threatening legal action to avoid accountability. I looked up just in time to see Karen across the street pretending to water her bushes, watching for reactions. I gave her a small wave. She looked away. That was her second mistake. Because what she didn't realize was that the neighborhood was finally starting to notice. The flyer, which she thought would turn people against us, backfired completely. That night, we had 3 neighbors knock on our door. One was a retired police captain. One was a schoolteacher. The third was a young couple with 2 kids. All of them said the same thing: "We're tired of Karen. They'd been putting up with her bullying for years. Fines for kids playing basketball. Fines for having guests park in the street." One neighbor said she was fined for painting her front door a slightly different shade of beige. "She bullies everyone," the teacher said. "But you too? You stood up to her. Now she's scared." Rachel invited them in and laid out everything: our documents, her legal filings, and the timeline of harassment. That's when the police captain pulled out his phone and showed us something unexpected: a private neighborhood group chat with dozens of messages complaining about Karen over the years. People had been afraid to say anything publicly. "She finds out who complains," he explained, "and makes their life hell. But now that she's gone after you, people see that she's not invincible." Over the next few days, more stories poured in. One man said Karen tried to ban him from putting up a flag on his lawn because it was too political. Another couple said she demanded they remove a tree planted in memory of their late son because it wasn't HOA-approved landscaping. Rachel took every statement and added it to her growing file. Meanwhile, I started noticing more smiles, more waves from neighbors. People who used to avoid eye contact were now walking their dogs right past Karen's place, daring her to say something. The power shift had begun. Then came the letter we were waiting for. A formal summons from the county board for an investigative hearing into HOA misconduct. Karen was being brought in for questioning. But here's the kicker: Rachel, as the judge in our district, couldn't personally oversee the case to avoid conflict of interest. So it was passed to her longtime colleague, Judge Ellis, a no-nonsense man with zero patience for abuse of power. Karen didn't take it seriously at first. We heard through the grapevine she planned to walk in, deny everything, and walk out clean. But Rachel knew Ellis. She knew how prepared he liked his hearings. And she made sure he had everything. The HOA charter, a side-by-side analysis of the violations, testimonies from nearly a dozen neighbors, and of course, the false police complaint she tried to weaponize. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Karen walked in dressed like she owned the building: bright blazer, pearl necklace, fake confidence. But the moment Judge Ellis started reading the list of accusations, her face drained of color. "Mrs. Adams," he said, "you've been accused of issuing fines not authorized by the HOA charter, selectively enforcing rules, intimidating residents, and filing a false report with local law enforcement. How do you respond?" Karen fumbled. These are just angry neighbors who don't respect structure. I was doing my job. Was it your job, Ellis interrupted, to tell law enforcement that a resident was a threat to the neighborhood for placing a trash bin out 12 minutes past regulation time, when in fact, your own rules permit that time? She paused. I may have misunderstood the bylaw. Did you misunderstand it before or after you issued 10 other fines based on it to different residents, all of which are time-stamped and documented? Karen stammered. Her confidence was melting like ice on a hot summer day. Ellis then turned to the stack of neighbor complaints. We have affidavits from 11 residents alleging similar harassment tactics. Some go back 2 years. Do you dispute those? Karen looked around the room, realized most of those residents were present, watching silently. I didn't know people felt that way. Well, Judge Ellis said, leaning forward, you do now. Karen didn't say much after that. She sat down, shoulders slumped, and listened as her carefully maintained house of control came crumbling down in public. The rest of the hearing was essentially a formality. Witness after witness confirmed what Judge Ellis had already concluded. This wasn't just 1 or 2 bad decisions. This was a long pattern of deliberate abuse. Karen had manipulated the rules, twisted bylaws to serve her ego, and retaliated against anyone who stood up to her. And the real kicker? All the fake violations she wrote, every one of them, were unenforceable. She had no legal authority to file criminal complaints, no board vote to back her policies, and no clause in the HOA bylaws that allowed her to act like a one-woman enforcement squad. By the end of the hearing, Judge Ellis delivered his verdict clearly and firmly. Mrs. Adams, your actions as HOA president have gone far beyond the scope of your duties and have violated not only civil procedure but the trust of this entire community. Effective immediately, you are removed from your position on the HOA board. You are further prohibited from holding any leadership position within any homeowners association for a minimum of 10 years. In addition, you are being referred for investigation under the County Civil Code for misuse of municipal resources and abuse of legal process. Karen's face turned pale. Her mouth hung slightly open as she muttered something under her breath, but there was no audience left to impress. People weren't looking at her anymore with fear or forced respect. They were just tired of her. Judge Ellis then turned to Rachel and nodded. Thank you for bringing this forward with such thorough documentation. Without your persistence, this could have continued indefinitely. Rachel didn't smile. She simply nodded back, professional and calm, the way she always handled justice, with quiet strength. After the hearing, something incredible happened. As Rachel and I walked out of the building, we were met with applause. Not loud. Not staged. Just a sincere ripple of clapping from neighbors who had come to support us, many of whom we barely knew when we first moved in. The retired cop came up and shook my hand. You two just gave this neighborhood its freedom back. The schoolteacher smiled. We're finally not scared to live here. Even the young couple who'd been fined for their door color looked visibly relieved. Thank you, they said, for standing up to her when no one else could. I looked at Rachel and said, well, I guess retirement just got a little more meaningful. She chuckled. I came here for peace and quiet. I didn't plan to become the neighborhood revolution leader. Too late, I said, smiling. You're officially the most popular judge on the block. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood began to change. Not because of some huge sweeping reform, but because people felt free again. Kids played in driveways without fear. Garden flags and patio chairs returned. People actually started talking to each other, really talking. A special election was held to choose a new HOA board. This time, residents voted in a balanced group of members who promised to work with homeowners instead of against them. No more surprise fines. No more threats. Just transparency, fairness, and a little common sense. And as for Karen? Well, she didn't move away, at least not yet. She still lives in her same house, across the street from us. But the difference is, she's silent now. Her golf cart hasn't moved in weeks. The clipboards are gone. She rarely even steps outside, and when she does, her sunglasses can't hide the fact that she's no longer the queen of the hill. We see her sometimes peeking through the blinds during our evening porch gatherings. Because yes, we started hosting monthly neighborhood BBQs, right there on the very same porch Karen once claimed had unapproved furniture. It's kind of poetic, really. We grill burgers, share stories, and sometimes even laugh about the whole thing. But we never talk about her with anger. There's no need. Karen's power vanished the moment people realized they weren't alone. That was the lesson. That the real strength of a neighborhood doesn't come from fear or enforcement, it comes from unity. From people standing up, together, and saying, enough. One night, during one of our BBQs, one of the neighbors brought over a wooden sign he'd carved himself. It said, "This porch is HOA approved." We all burst out laughing. We nailed it right over the front steps. So now, whenever someone new moves in and asks what happened to the old HOA president, someone always points at that sign and says, "That? Oh, that's from the time she tried to get our neighbor arrested, but the judge was his wife." And every time, without fail, it gets a laugh. Because now it's not a story about fear or abuse of power, it's a story about what happens when justice shows up in a hoodie and slippers, armed not with threats, but with the truth.